hours of grinding, practicing, and promoting. Thousands of dollars spent on equipment, and I still don't think I really needed to upgrade my PC again. We don't even use our stuff on the day. Not to mention the over 15 years of friendship. You have put all of that at risk. What were you thinking? I wasn't. Neither of us were. Do you think a lot when you're drunk? Cam replied, his head buried in his hands. He had been sitting on the edge of my bed in my hotel room like that for the last 30 minutes. I had been berating him for the last 10 to 15. It was lucky that he and I were on a different floor to Minnie and Vince. Cam was submerged in guilt. He was miserable, and he looked terrible. I hadn't seen him this messed up since his older brother died. I was struggling to find it in me to care at that moment. No, that wasn't true. I cared a lot. I cared an extreme amount. I cared about the time and money I had wasted on our shared hobby turned profession. I cared about Cam and Minnie. I cared a hell of a lot about what their stupidity was going to do to Vince. We'd all been friends since middle school. In one night, they might have burned that to the ground. The semis are tomorrow night. What do we do? That was the crux of it. I knew what Cam was really asking. He was asking if they should tell Vince. It was going to come out eventually. After our game the previous day, we went out for a few drinks. Vince and I had both decided to turn in relatively early. This was a day we were meant to spend resting and planning before the semifinals, not recovering from hangovers. Cam and Minnie had stayed out longer, apparently longer than they had intended. Not the best excuse for cheating on your longtime partner or fucking your friend and teammate's girlfriend. They had to tell Vince. They owed him that. But if they told him now, the team would collapse on itself. I was sure of that much. Even if we came out of it with our relationship still holding together, we wouldn't be in the headspace to win and head to the finals. Our teamwork would be shot. We'd lose. Years of effort would be wasted. The fact Cam was trying to push the weight of that decision onto me only made me angrier. But, in a way, I was another victim here. Not to the extent of Vince, but it was my effort, friendships, and future they had compromised too. He wasn't asking for my opinion out of concern for me. I wasn't dumb enough to think his intentions were so noble. He just didn't want to make the call himself, but he was still giving me a chance here. If I told them to keep it quiet for just one more week and act normal, and they managed to hold it together, we had a real shot at victory. At the very least, all the work I'd put into this when I hadn't even really intended to go pro to begin with wouldn't have been wasted by their screw-up. But when Vince found out, I'd be complicit. I wouldn't be the bystander caught up in their drama. I wouldn't be a lesser victim. Not in his eyes. I'd be the guy who kept Cam and Minnie's secret for my own benefit. One of the bad guys. Shit. I sunk into the chair, leaning my head against the glass door to the balcony behind it and staring at the ceiling. The fight had been taken out of me and I just felt sick. I was still angry, furious even, that they did that to Vince, that they were asking me to decide for them, that they had such monumentally bad timing. I was angry at myself, too, for not knowing the right answer, or, truthfully, for knowing the right answer and not being able to immediately give it. But I had given so much of myself to our group ambition. I wasn't sure I could let that go for morality that wasn't going to make anyone feel better. Yeah, Cam replied, his head still in his hands. He had hardly looked at me since he came into my room blubbering, still half drunk and freaking out. You can't hide it forever, I said. Minnie might have told him already. She said she wouldn't. Not yet. Not until I got your opinion. She's better at keeping a straight face. He won't know. He was probably right. It wasn't so much that Minnie was an incredible liar. Vince just always assumed people were telling the truth. He was the optimistic sort and liked to believe people were mostly good. That only made the situation worse. He didn't react well when he was proven wrong. What do we do? Cam asked again. Fuck you, I spat back. I wasn't shouting anymore. but Cam still flinched like I was. Fuck you and Minnie both for this, and fuck you twice for making it my problem. I'm sorry, man. I just didn't know what to do. I know we shouldn't have. We were drunk, Cam pleaded. You've told me you were drunk 5 times now, and it doesn't make it better or me less angry. You're already going to ruin Vince. That much is guaranteed. You have well and truly screwed the pooch on this one. But have you even considered the position you put me in by coming to me first? I'm a part of this now. I was yelling again by the end. I still felt sick. It rang hollow in my ears, like I was putting on airs to shield myself from the decision I was going to have to make now. I wasn't even sure how much of it was on Vince's behalf anymore. I'm sorry, Cam sniffed, holding back tears. I didn't really feel like he had any right to cry about anything. If he didn't want to experience all of this, he should have kept it in his pants. You should be, I said, and Minnie's lucky she didn't show up here with you because I have more than a few choice words for her, too. I knew I still hadn't answered the question. I was doing the same thing as Cam in a way. Where he was wallowing in self-pity and trying to push the decision onto someone else, I was trying to lose myself in anger. Just delaying the inevitable moment a choice had to be made. For a moment, I wondered if I even had to make that choice. I considered remaining silent and pretending that I'd never heard anything, but that was no different than actively choosing to hide the truth from Vince at this point. Whether I made the choice to intentionally deceive Vince so that I could cling on to some chance of the team still pulling off the win, or tried to just not acknowledge the problem, the fact was that I knew. Silence was damning. Vince was going to be wrecked one way or the other. It was just a matter of if it came before or after the tournament. I could hardly expect Cam or Minnie to be on form now. Our chances weren't what they were, but we were better than the other team. We still had a chance to make the dream real. All we had to do was stay quiet and pretend this hadn't happened. Delay Vince's heartbreak a week. It was like I had swallowed a stone. There was a nauseating weight in my stomach. I could try to deny it as much as I wanted, but I had realized what I was going to say long before I said anything. I just didn't want to admit to myself it was the case. Don't tell him. The shock of hearing me say it made Cam's head bolt upright, his eyes wide. He was a deer in the headlights. There was relief there, at someone else making the call, but there was horror, too. He knew he was scum. He just thought I'd be better. So had I. You and Minnie ruined the team. We probably won't make it through this, but the goal is still within reach. If Vince is going to be torn up either way, we might as well hold things together long enough for us all to achieve what we came here for. So you and Minnie better keep your shit together for this. The ship is going down in flames. You better make sure we make it to the destination before we drown. Okay. Now get out. I don't think I can keep looking at you. As Cam got up and fled the crime scene, I couldn't help but wonder, if I looked in a mirror at that moment, could I look at myself either?
Hello, and welcome to Stories Across Borders. Here we discuss stories told across a range of different mediums: books, movies, games, you name it. The only rule is that we can only discuss things in terms of the writing. Anything like acting, animation, art, or mechanics is out unless it relates directly to how the story is being told. I am Daniel Radford, author, pro gamer, and also your host. And today I'm joined by John Kernan, my usual co host, and someone who is actually somewhat good at video games.
Yeah, but only some of them, and not great, just good.
He was also the voice you just heard reading my short story, Playing Games, which is the reason I keep talking about video games in this intro. Don't get confused, you're still on SAB.
Yeah, don't worry. We've got things to talk about related to video games, and also things that really get in the way of video games.
Uh, so, as we tend to do with the fourth episode of a cycle, I guess I'll kick us off by just talking a little bit about why I chose to write what I did. and the choices I made in doing so, as we tend to do here. So, looking back at the previous, more specific episodes in this cycle, we did Designated Survivor, which is a story centered around really high stakes political drama. And we can understand that and how it impacts people and those around them in the world, but it's not really something we can easily relate to. By the same token, The Witcher deals with weirdly more relatable drama in a lot of ways. It deals a lot with like how people perceive each other, prejudice, loneliness, but it still also has a lot of this very high stakes political and moral stuff going on. Lives at stake, worlds at stake, and it's a very fantastical backdrop of monsters and magic and things like that.
Witcher has this very interesting, I almost want to say, like drama back and forth of it has so many things going on and affecting the characters, and sometimes many big things, but also the drama never becomes any less personal or interpersonal because ultimately we're following one person and all the drama comes from how these things affect him and how he deals with it.
Yeah. Nonetheless, though, for this story, I wanted to do something that was going to bring us back down to a level that we can very easily not just understand but relate to. Something more normal, for want of a better word, I guess. A very mundane kind of drama, which is how we landed on doing a story of this nature. Hilariously enough, we had a bigger time crunch than we usually do for this story, so I was clutching at straws for inspiration. This group in question, the characters in this story, went through so many incarnations in my head before I settled on professional gamers. They've been athletes, they've been a startup company, they've been students, mountaineers. Uh, but a friend of mine has been talking a lot about a pro gaming event that is currently going on at the time of writing this, so here we are.
And that's the essence of gaming is coming in clutch when you're out of time.
True enough. But, also we're both big into games in varying different ways and things like that. Most of our audience is going to be able to connect to people who are into games. I suppose that probably played a bit of a part in my mind why I chose that instead of any of the other many options that came up. But honestly, the combination of time crunch, very very human sort of setting, and just constantly having a friend talking about this other event in the background. Probably why we ended up where we ended up in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I actually just had a thought that damn, if only we had been able to get it up properly. You know who I think would have been like a great um a great guest to have on this episode as a third person?
A lot of people.
Fox, talking about pro gaming and drama.
I love that no one has a clue who we're talking about. But yeah, we do have a friend who would have been very entertaining on this episode and most episodes.
But yeah, God,
Get
I
him on
mean,
one day.
there's a it's a situation I would say not everybody has been, and in fact, I myself haven't been in literally this situation, but in the broad strokes, it's a situation so many people, especially the type of people who like to sit and relax and listen to podcasts, have been in, and that's being the person who was focused on something and trying to be responsible and not going too far overboard while having fun or getting wrapped up in anything, only to be wrapped up in all the drama and everything dumb that comes around and wrong anyways as a result of your friends being stupid and or irresponsible and or horny or all of the above at once.
Yeah, being the responsible friend sucks.
Sometimes it's really annoying. People like to think that being the responsible friend means a lot of "I told you so's" and a lot of smugness, and sometimes it means some of that, but, no amount of smugness or "I told you so's" or "Ha, I was right" in your own head makes you feel better when you're dealing with other people's bullshit. It doesn't help.
Yeah, like, you get to say "I told you so" later on, definitely, but in the moment, you're more akin to you're not really in a position to be high and mighty. You're more in a position of, "Oh god, how do I clean this stupid situation you guys have gotten us into up in a way that leaves everyone okay at the end? Because I've got to take care of all of you because you've all gotten involved in this massive mess of the situation." And that was something I was very much keeping in mind when I was coming up with this scenario and the characters. I wanted it to be a very real thing, a mundane thing that anyone could see themselves in very easily in one of these characters. You know, maybe it's not the responsible friend you relate to. Maybe you've been one of the people who messed up in some way and caused trouble for other people. We've all been that person too, to some extent.
Or God forbid, and I'm sorry if you were, but maybe you've been Vince,
Yeah, poor Vince.
the guy who did nothing wrong and has to
Did
pay for
nothing
it.
wrong. Yes. Yeah, I mean, we've all been there too. Not necessarily in this kind of scenario, but that was the thing. I wanted it to be very real, very human, very mundane, something that even if it's the scenario itself wasn't the same, we could see ourselves in all of these characters because I wanted the characters, even our unseen victim Vince, to be flawed human people. Uh, because as we've discussed, drama, whilst in a broad technical definition, just means story is serious and character driven. We wanted to narrow that definition down a lot more for this purpose of this cycle and really focus in on the fact that a drama story is character driven. It is driven by the human element. So I wanted to make this a very human story.
Yeah, ultimately, drama is nothing but the intermingling, for the most part, the intermingling of people's flaws. I almost guess you could call it, because stuff happening that could be called dramatic isn't always bad. There's even events I would say you could call dramatic that are good things, but for the vast most part, all drama comes from either someone or multiple people making mistakes or personalities clashing and grating against each other. Ultimately, drama is friction. It's it's friction between people's emotions or actions or what have you.
I mean, stories are driven by conflict.
Yep.
That's whether it's conflict with the world, conflict within the self, or conflict interpersonally. Conflict is what drives most stories. And in a story like this one, which isn't an action adventure or a horror story or even a more large stakes kind of drama, that conflict has to take this sort of more interpersonal and also inner kind of form. And the way that it becomes a driving force is in the form of this choice that has been thrust on our unnamed protagonist.
Yeah, the small series of events that have no stakes at all for the wider world or most other people, other than like whoever was looking forward to watching that upcoming game and what fans they might have garnered so far. Although considering they have to win to pay off everything they've done to get here, probably pretty small scale tournament. This is probably more like the first step towards really being pros. There's very little wider stakes other than that, but the personal stakes are almost as big as they could be. 15 years of friendship potentially down the toilet. Well, likely down the toilet. All the work they've done to get here, someone's relationship, all things that nobody else really has any reason to care about. But these four care a lot about all of them, and it could hurt each one of them so bad. And ironically, our narrator is the person here who has the least to lose, but also the one who is the most frustrated by it all because of having to deal with it, despite it not being because of any of their actions.
Yeah,
I keep thinking of the narrator as a he, but that's because I narrated it.
yeah. It was a he in my head when I was doing this. No, no real reason other than the fact that I'm a he, and I knew that it was going to be narrated by a male voice.
Yeah, but really, I mean,
It could
it's
be
it's
anybody.
it's
They
good
don't
that
have a
there's
name.
no name or anything giving to the
They don't even
narrator
have they don't
because
even really have any pronouns listed yet.
the name and pronouns aren't important, and, it's again, this is a position that anybody could fall into and could be relatable to anybody, so it's nice to have them not strictly labeled.
Yeah, I mean, part of the story was that it could be anybody in this situation. It could happen to anybody. It's such a it's happening right now all over the world.
Yeah, and it is anybody. It's narrator kun. Ugh, ugh,
um, I
now
hate
I'm
that
one
you
of those
said that.
people. It's it feels right as a term, but I can never get past, even if it's me saying it, how just any any English speaker with no sort of accent using Japanese honorifics hurts. It sounds so terrible every time.
Really does. But you, before you traumatized us all, you did touch on something interesting, right? Which I think we've talked about this before on the podcast, and I've definitely written articles about this on my site. This idea of the stakes being not a matter of importance at all for like the vast majority of the population, but for these guys, it's everything. Because yeah, they're not like big names established in the industry or whatever. They're just they are a group of friends on the crux of achieving greatness. But the stakes is something that I actually like that you brought up because there's this it's a really common misconception with a lot of people, especially like beginning writers and things like that. This idea that tension comes from the size of the stakes, right? But the reality is that larger stakes can actually cause your audience to become disinterested because the greater the stakes are, it is. Oh, let me phrase this better. The chances of your protagonist failing is inversely proportional or proportionate to the greatness of the stakes. If the world ends, if they fail, they're probably not going to fail because then there's no more story to tell.
Not many writers or authors are just going to be like, "Well, my hero's lost, the world is destroyed."
Nothing mattered.
Not that it never happens. Some people do do it, but only if they're usually prepared to move on from there and keep the story going. You have to kind of be expecting that to happen to have any belief that great stakes are really going to go through. Not many authors do it because not many authors want all of their characters to die and their world to end, even if they want to continue their story down a darker path. And it's just a plain risk. It's one of the easiest places to write yourself into a corner.
Yeah, and obviously, if you have like super low stakes that no one in the story cares about either, like the example I gave in my article, excuse me, in my article was like a bake off where with no character investment, who would give a shit? It's a bake off, but by making it like really important to the characters involved in this mundane, silly little competition, which I'm sure a lot of people would take very seriously. Suddenly those very mundane, low stakes become a lot more captivating. It's a lot easier for an audience to become invested in them. And this is exactly the same sort of thing here. these stakes
Yeah.
don't matter to the world at large. They don't even matter too much to a fan base, really, because these guys aren't that well established here, which is part of why it's such a problem for them that this is happening.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when you think about it, right? Because I could never say it doesn't matter at all. The scale of stakes does matter, but only in how relevant it is to what kind of story you want to tell. It's easy for people to get wrapped up in it, but ultimately, like, if I were to abbreviate it, I would ultimately say, like, as far as audience investment, nobody cares about the scale of stakes, even when they think they do. They only care about how personal they are, how personally relevant they are to our characters, which, of course, goes back to we always say it. We never stop saying it's ultimately all about the characters. Even when you're not thinking about the characters, the reason stuff is important to you is because it's important or relevant to the people in the story. Otherwise, there would be no context and it genuinely wouldn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, that's why even in these like big high stakes science fiction and fantasy stories where worlds are on the line, you generally don't deal with things at a large scale. You focus on a small number of people and why this is personal to them and who they are fighting for and trying to save. And you typically have villains who have some sort of personal relationship to your protagonist because that is more engaging and more easy for your audience to relate to. That's why a story about playing the game that has those stakes can be as engaging, at least I hope it was, as a story actually about saving the world, if not more so, depending on the quality of the writing.
Yeah,
Because
I don't care about the gaming tournament. But I've been made to care as much as you can in a short time about these four
yeah,
people, and I
and
don't
like
care
what, four
about
pages?
I don't care about uh kings or queens. I care about Geralt, and you know what? I don't care about presidents or the White House. I would dare to say I the opposite of care. I hate politicians and for the most part politics in general, at least American politics. Fictional politics are fun to get involved in. Politics as a concept isn't bad. I hate modern day real world politics. Um, but I like Kirkman, and that's all I need.
And that's what we've been saying through this whole cycle is if anyone, especially someone who is like trying to design games or write stories or pen scripts, is listening to this, the one thing we desperately want you to take away from this is that drama drives stories. Characters are everything. And if you're someone who isn't a creative who's been listening to this, we're just hoping to recontextualize the stories that you like for you a little bit and maybe broaden your horizons and give you a reason to try out some stuff you normally wouldn't. Because ultimately, it's the characters in a story and how the narrative affects them that are going to get you engaged a lot more than the setting or the plot, the world building, any of that stuff. Even if
Yeah,
it's amazing.
ultimately, don't ever let yourself be afraid of or avoidant or even really like ambivalent to drama when it comes to a story because whether you like to admit it or not, or even if you're not thinking of it as drama, you can't have a good story without drama. Some kind of drama is going to be drama is what people get invested in. Even a lot of the things people get invested in, they don't think of as drama. It is.
Exactly.
You can't avoid it. It's all
And
drama.
unless it's comedy, it's drama, basically,
Yeah.
with some outliers.
And even then, like, comedy doesn't last very long without a little drama thrown in.
Too true. Very few things are just one thing or the other when it comes to storytelling. You know,
Absolutely.
even Designated Survivor and The Witcher sprinkle some comedy. And in fact, season two of designated survivor, starts leaning a lot more heavily into some more comedic moments, weirdly enough. Um,
I'm almost there. I'm at the end of season 1. Spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't started yet, I'm sorry. He's in the hospital
yeah, he's having a great time. Uh, but
doing good.
being very presidential, but bringing things back down to our mundane level. Uh, I do think, especially when you're dealing with like character drama, who your perspective character is always an important part of how drama is presented and how the audience reacts to it. It's part of why like first person is such a good method of storytelling, I think, for when you're dealing with a very character focused story. Because more than anything, that lets you get into someone's head and see how they see the world.
Yeah, there's no better way to relate to someone than to get in their head. Although you
Uh,
still have to know what you're doing. Something I've noticed that I don't know if it's that relevant because I'm sure anybody who hears it is going to be a no duh, but a pitfall I do genuinely see authors fall into sometimes, especially if they're not dedicated to always doing stuff in first person. Sometimes people write someone in first person and they stop thinking while writing that, like, this needs to be how a person thinks. Like, some people don't write a first person character that different from how they would write a third person, and perspective matters so much.
yeah, you do have to keep in mind that you are not writing your words, you're writing someone else's thoughts. Uh, Luckily, with our unnamed protagonist here, they're kind of an everyman in a lot of ways. They're very blank slates. An they're an ordinary person in every sense of the word, you know, but you can still get an understanding of who they are as a person from the way they think, and the way their thoughts play out. Like as the story goes on, you can see the writing on the wall for the decision they end up making before it happens because they stop gradually going, okay, which do I choose? And they start thinking more and more when if slash when I make this decision, this is how it's going to play out. They start justifying things in their head more and more because it is a person's thought process you're reading here, not a third person narrator just describing things happening.
Yeah, and the narrator sums it up well themselves near the end. Like, yeah, so upset at myself for not knowing what to do. Well, actually, I'm upset at myself for knowing what to do immediately and not being able to just do it.
Yeah, because they realize that they're being kind of selfish here. But it's it's so easy to understand why they end up taking this more selfish route because it is easy to justify. Vince is going to be fucking miserable regardless.
Yeah,
It's true.
it's easy to tell yourself. In fact, it's less that it's easy to tell yourself and more that it's very, very difficult not to tell yourself that you doing the right thing won't really make anybody feel much better or make all of this go any smoother. It will just eliminate any chance you have of trying to get through the right here, right now, the way you want to.
Yeah, I mean, it's so easy to tell yourself that it doesn't matter if you do the right thing or not. It's not really going to matter in the long run. And in some
You
ways,
might
it's
even be right.
yeah, I would say in some ways it's true. Like Vince is going to be very upset regardless. But hey, at least their careers might be saved if he doesn't tell him now. But by the same token, the team isn't going to be on form. He even acknowledges this himself. Their chances of winning shrank drastically because because three of them are going to have their heads somewhere else during this whole situation.
Yeah, and and even if you did get through and win the tournament, also, what are you gonna do afterwards? Are you never gonna tell Vince? Or are you going to like, because when you do tell him, like, "Okay, cool, you won the tournament, and maybe you at least paid off that money you spent on the games. Now it's time to live the rest of your, life, and you're back in the exact same situation again, except now, undeniably, you are part of the problem, and you did do a bad thing before it was all over."
Yeah, what he's weighing up here is essentially, is my friendship with Vince worth my potential career?
And if he had been able to put it into those words, I think they would have actually probably ended up saying, "Yes, taking care of Vince's feelings is worth it." The problem is they didn't actually all the way get 100 to that percent to that point. That is the crux of the problem, but they weren't thinking of it that literally, that black and white yet. They are too wrapped up in their investment and frustration and feeling stuck.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of my favorite things about this narrator is you did touch on this earlier yourself as well, is that this isn't actually their problem.
Nope.
Cam made it their problem in a way by coming to them first and being like, "Haha, I fucked up and I'm now asking you what to do because I'm trying to push some of the responsibility for what happens next off of myself."
Yeah. Would have had to deal with the fallout anyways, but at least if Cam hadn't done that, it could have been surprised right alongside Vince and just been mad about it and yelled and been there to comfort their friend.
All of them even, but now he's this person is complicit whether they asked for it or not because they have this knowledge and have to make the decision to either tell Cam, go tell Vince themselves, or keep silent. And let's be honest, the first two are basically the same decision.
Yeah, there are few more painful or trappy feeling situations or sensations than having a sense of responsibility, not only that you didn't ask for, but that shouldn't be yours when something really isn't your responsibility, but you at least partially have a responsibility for it one way or the other. Like the responsibility of knowledge, and that somebody knows you have that knowledge, and that from now on, no matter what you do, what decision you make, even if it's the right one, it's colored by the fact that you had that knowledge and you have to make that decision about something that's not your responsibility.
Yeah, and I think it says a lot, right, about this person's thought processes that is how it's framed a lot of the way through this. It's framed in terms of this situation is something I was dragged into against my will. I didn't ask to be a part of this. It was thrust upon me, and now I am a part of it, whether I like it or not. And on top of that, they're focused almost like they obviously do care about Vince and even about Cam and Minnie, but they're very much focused on you've on what this situation has done to them in the moment. Partly, I think, because some of it's just human self-centeredness, and some of it is because they've been very abruptly dragged into this without asking to be, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, plus they're the only person in a situation that is ambiguous at all. They're the only a person in this situation in a shade of gray. Everybody else's situations are genuinely black and white. Vince Vince did nothing wrong at all and is going to suffer all the consequences anyways. Ham and Minnie did something very wrong and just haven't owned up to it and immediately dealt with it. And this person is neither. They've got the burden of knowledge, but also not being directly involved. They're the only one who has anything to think about. Ham and Minnie are thinking about it and avoiding it anyways, But for them, it is a 100 it's always been a 100% black and white. It's obvious what they should and have to do, they just aren't.
Yeah, the narrator is the only one who is in a morally gray area here where they aren't responsible at all for the situation, but they now have the information and will influence the outcome one way or the other. It
Sucks.
is, yeah, it is not a situation that anyone wants to be in. So, as an audience, I feel like even as you find yourself starting to dislike this narrator more and more as their thought process goes on, you can't help but also kind of pity them because the worst of them is getting brought out by a situation that they didn't have to be made a part of.
Yeah, they feel scared and trapped and cornered, and it's I think that is more than anything else what's making making them run away. Because I not to make the situation I don't want to make the situation less relatable at all, but I kind of get the vibe from this narrator that if them and Cam had switched places, they would have gone straight to Vince, and that's also part of why it's frustrating. They are specifically in the worst version of this situation for them, the one that leaves them the most conflicted and stuck and trapped. Whereas in either of the black and white situations, they would have just done the obvious, simple thing, despite the fact that who of their friends did not.
You see, that's interesting that you say that because the way I wrote this character was for it to be very open-ended about the kind of person they actually are. They've clearly got a self-centered streak, but by the same token, they also very much do care about their friends. So I wrote this in a way where it isn't, in my mind, immediately clear what they would do in Cam and Minnie's position.
It's
It is
definitely
kind of
not.
it's which isn't to say they wouldn't take the course of action that you outlined there. It's that I wrote this in a way where I intended for it to be kind of up in the air what they would do in Cam's place here. The idea that it's up to the audience to decide what kind of person they think this narrator is by the end.
Yeah, I almost feel like it's less of a moral thing and just more. I think this person likes. I I I say this person would have gone to Vince right away, less out of like even a morality thing and more that it would have been part morality and part thinking like, well, it's the best and least painful way to deal with it, and we still got the rest of our lives to live, so I'm just gonna go deal with it. I already fucked up.
Yeah, I mean, there is a bit of the sort of pragmatic strategist in their mind where I could see them going that route based purely on the fact that this is the version of Vince finding out the truth uh, that reflects least badly on them,
Mhm.
self-preservation in a way, because ultimately that is what motivates the decision they make. They basically say the ship is going down in flames. Please get me, your passenger, the neutral party, to shore before that happens.
Yeah, it's tough, man. I've never, I already said earlier, I've never been in this direct situation, but I still sympathize with it really, really strongly because despite the fact that I consider myself a kind, moral person for the most part. I care a lot about other people and their feelings, but no matter how much I care about people, nothing eliminates the selfish voice. It's still always there, and sometimes it's really, really loud, even when I know what I want to do or what I should do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true of everyone, right? I mean, again, and that's part of why I wrote it this way is that we all have that voice because it is biologically, genetically ingrained in us. It's the survival instinct, the idea of make sure that you get through this so your legacy, your genes, whatever, will eventually get through it. Like will continue. It is the same thing. It's just that that instinct has less and less of a place in human society, and we've gone from apart from being in a world where that instinct was what kept us alive and kept us going, to that is the instinct that is slowly destroying everything.
Sometimes it feels like having a sociopath living inside of your head who is better at arguing than you are, and you have to just eventually tell them to shut up, and you don't care.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy to turn that voice off. It has to, for most of us, I, to an extent, I would say for everybody, it has to be a conscious choice to say, yeah, this other road is harder. It could be worse for me personally, but for other people, for those around me, it's better. And to be fair, this situation isn't an exact mirror of that. It's a little bit more complicated because it is somewhat up in the air which situation is going to be better in the long term for our narrator. It's not exactly a one-to-one translation, but it's coming from the same place.
Yeah, it's interesting too because it can sometimes go beyond morals too, because sometimes that voice is in the thing that might be like practically or like practically better, but not emotionally. Because, sometimes both sides of the argument are actually also about what's better for you. And sometimes the decision is like, well, is it worth it? What's more worth it? Going through this pain or these bad things that might get in the direct path of my goals, or going through the pain and guilt of either doing something wrong or something that makes me feel terrible and makes me feel unhappy, even though technically on the outside it looks like a better outcome. You have to like argue with that voice and be like, Is it better if I won't feel better?"
Yeah, I mean, because that's part of what it is. Like, really, it's a question of personal value even more than it is moral for this person. It's the choice of, do I risk my this friendship I've had for over 15 years for the chance at getting this dream career, which didn't even start as a dream career for this person, I'm pretty sure I said. This wasn't something they were super into the idea of at first. It has become a big part of their life because of the actions of the other people in the group.
Yeah, they just went with the flow and now they're here.
And now it is a huge part of their life, whether that was ever their intent originally or not. And it is a matter of choosing that, the chance of having that success versus possibly losing a friendship that means a lot to them. And some of that is also a question of which one of these is going to make me feel worse in the long run. Should it
Yeah.
probably factor into that?
Get to feel bad no matter what. Just decide what flavor of bad and see if you can figure out which one's gonna be worse.
And ultimately, the decision they made was, well, Vince is going to be miserable regardless. Minnie and Cam deserve whatever happens here, and I'll still have them probably. I
I
guess.
didn't do anything wrong. Maybe I can at least still come out through this okay.
Yeah, basically, I didn't do anything wrong. This isn't my problem to be a part of. I'm going to take the course of action where hopefully all of this work and investment that they dragged me into to begin with pays off and I get something out of it instead of it all going up in smoke, friendships and career both. And it's it's really easy as someone outside of the story, as the audience, to look at this and go, "Man, what's wrong with you? You're a dick. Like this is not the morally correct decision to make here. This isn't okay." But I think most of us would not have a super easy time making this decision. Even the most moral of us would still probably hesitate before making the choice. We all like to think we would prioritize our friendship. We all like to think we're that sort of the sort of person who would be like, in an instant, either you go tell him right now or I do. Fuck the career situation. He has to know. But
Yeah, thousands of dollars is thousands of dollars is more more non-survival money than I get to spend in an average year.
yeah,
So I would be real conflicted about trying to win that game.
yeah. I mean, I'll exactly that. Like, I look at this situation and I look at it and I'm like, I want to think that I would prioritize my relationship with Vince in this situation because people are important to me and their well-being is important to me. But by the same token, I can't 100% say that I would do it. That I would risk a career I had been working that hard on for that long, investing that much money in over a situation that could completely blow up in my face anyway.
Yeah, especially while a voice is in your head yelling, "I never wanted any of this."
Literally none of this was something I asked for. Yeah, and that's a loud voice,
Yeah, that's rough.
and I love stories like that.
Yeah, me too.
It's almost the same situation as horror, right? Where you experience these situations that are very intriguing to theorize about and to put yourself in some like weird twisted fantasy situation and be like, how would I handle this? Would I do X? Would I do that? And they're great for self-examination and they're fascinating as a result of that. Both because you're invested in what happens because this is clearly so important to the characters, but also because you can look at it and you can put yourself in these situations and suddenly it's not just a story, it's a thought experiment.
Yeah, it's a tough one. In fact, honestly, this isn't where I expected my thoughts to go, although now that it's happened, I guess I kind of get why. Got me thinking a little bit about Spider-Man actually. Um and how so much not too much of the drama in the Spider-Man stories comes from whether he can beat the villains or not. It still does, because Spider-Man's not nearly as much of a powerhouse as many other superheroes. But a lot of it comes from, the whole tagline we all know, with great power comes great responsibility. But it's also more than that. It's because Peter is a moral, kind person who, in and of himself, isn't actually that complicated, but his and the situations he runs into are incredibly complicated, even though he isn't. And he gets stuck in these constant situations where that voice is yelling and screaming him all the time. I didn't want this. I didn't do this. It's not my fault, but I have to deal with it anyways.
Yeah, I mean, he's a character who's constantly forced to choose between his personal happiness and well-being and the greater good.
Yeah,
It's this exact situation, but blown up in severity a million
and I
times.
think it gives good context to that because also, as a result of that, it's because of that that he actually runs into situations too, like this, where luckily Peter has a stronger sense of morality and duty than most people, so he's really good at arguing with that voice. But I think he also has an even louder and angrier version of that voice than most people, not only because of everything he's been through, but part of the conflict is because the situations he's in and it's so complicated. Peter's not a moral paragon. He makes mistakes and everything too. The thing where it gets tough is the consequences of every mistake he makes are so blown out of proportion, usually compared to how the size of the mistakes or how easy it is to make them. Every time he does one morally bad or reprehensible thing, it it practically ruins his life either personally or practically. He just like even when he doesn't want it, he has that responsibility just because of how much he pays for it every time he does something wrong.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a little more gray area in playing games than in like a Spider-Man situation, but ultimately it comes down to this idea of the morally correct choice and the easy choice, and more or less, obviously it's a little bit more gray for playing games, but and the reality is people suck at making that choice.
Yeah.
But just because of the way our brains are wired, we will so often choose short-term gain, ignoring long-term consequences. Like, think about how many times have you, audience, say, bought something that wasn't biodegradable or environmentally friendly because it was cheaper?
Yeah. It happens a lot.
Yeah, because in the short term, your money is incredibly important to your survival, to your comfort, your happiness, whether you want to acknowledge that or not. So you choose the cheaper option because that means in the short term you're going to have more money, which means more survival, more comfort, more happiness. But in the long term, you're contributing to a very big problem that is slowly dooming humanity.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that to guilt you right now, although if it's working and making you a better person, good. Uh, because none of us are above making those kinds of decisions. Sometimes we're forced to by our circumstances, but it's just an example of a common human trait, something that is true to all of us. And part of the problem is that it doesn't matter if you have more resources, there's still the part of your brain that does that. That's why you have this ludicrously rich people who could easily afford to be more generous and think more long term, but who don't
Yeah.
because we all still have the same stupid monkey
And that's
brains.
the biggest thing that makes that so relevant to this story too, because it really is an even smaller, less stakes, but like microcosm of the exact same conundrum. Because I mean, if you're a regular person and not some sort of fucking rich multi-billionaire, you didn't make this situation happen. You didn't make the environmental problems what they are, and it's not your fault that the better, more moral option is also literally the more expensive and painful one. You didn't, much like the narrator, you didn't ask for any of this, but you're here and you have to decide what to do anyways. And on top of that, even though it's a very small decision in the moment that could have bigger, more immediate consequences, you also have that voice in your head having the ammo of being able to be like, yeah, okay, we'll do the right thing this time. How much does it add up? Can we afford to do that every time?
Yeah, I mean exactly. The narrator is asking, using basically success and friendships as currency here, is basically asking the question of, can I afford, quite literally, even really talking, to give up this opportunity, to throw this opportunity.
And am I even sure, which set of consequences will last longer and reverberate further?
Exactly. Because it's an ordinary person, and as we've established, people suck at thinking in long term. Uh, which is just as a side note, if you ever want to write a believable character, make them shit at making long term decisions.
Yeah, short-term decisions are almost a defense mechanism above all else, because sometimes when you're stuck and it seems like there's nothing you can do, uh, the only decision you can make while seeming like no decision at all is to just keep moving forward, just one single step at a time.
We are, for creatures who operate on the scale that we do as humans. Humans are hilariously bad at thinking in terms of the big picture, which is also, interestingly enough, a very big contributor as to why personal stakes resonate with us so much more than like large world-ending stakes. To take us back a full circle a little
Yeah,
bit.
because your brain doesn't wanna care about all the future generations affected by this drama or about an entire kingdom or country of people you've never met and never will meet. What's happening that's hurting this precious character in front of me right now who I love?
And pretty much the situation the narrator's in, and that's why drama's great. That's why I love stories that do this sort of thing, because it doesn't matter what the scale is. This a very similar situation could be in effect on so many different scales, and that's what I like about it because it will always work these tough decisions, the short term versus the long term, things like that. And they will always be a great source of drama and relatability and audience engagement because it is very human and stories thrive on not just conflict, but on the human element of those conflicts. That's why drama is a part of almost every story you can think of.
Sometimes the only way to come up with the right way to move forward in a tense situation is to write as if you're not actually writing to the people who are already invested or wanna get invested in your story, but as if you are writing to, um, an apathetic contrarian who's sitting next to you while you're writing going, "Yeah, but why do I care?"
Yeah, that's one way to do it.
Because ultimately, that's what you have to do. You have to make people care. There's always gonna be people around who want to care. You absolutely have to make sure you're paying enough attention to those people because, I mean, hell, if you push away the people who want to care, then you're doomed. But, you know, uh, there's not always enough of them, and sometimes to make a story really thrive, you also have to be able to pull in the people who either didn't think they were gonna care or for whatever reason didn't even wanna care before they started.
Yeah, I mean, nail on the head there. Like, if you want your story to be engaging, to be quality, to have an audience invested in it, you have to give them a reason to care about it. And the best way to do that is to give them characters they are invested in. Whether it's because they love them or hate them doesn't matter. But they have to care what happens to them.
Yeah, all publicity may not quite be, all, good publicity, but, it almost kinda translates to being true in a story. It it only partially matters what you make your audience feel, as long as you make them feel things about the characters, as long as they care. Even if they're mad, you just need to make sure that you're not making them feel those feelings objectively and at you. It needs to be at or about or because of the characters.
You can drag your audience into the drama. They did sign up for it.
They did. You're allowed to. They signed the waiver when they opened the book or turned on the show or started the game.
But honestly, on that note, I think we can probably leave that there. Like unless you actually wait, there is one thing we always have to do about with these episodes that I try to keep myself accountable to. Feedback. Is there anything about this story that jumps out at you that you would change, do different, or that you particularly liked?
I liked it a lot. I think for the most part, I kind of covered most of the stuff I already liked about it anyways while we were talking about it. I think you did a really good job making it relatable, and I was both hurt and entrenched by the fact that it was very easy and natural for me to see myself in this situation immediately while reading it. Um
You're welcome.
Almost gave me flashbacks to being younger and being so much less dramatic than all of my friends and not being involved in relationships or the interpersonal dramas that they brought to me anyways. And I don't really know for sure what I would I don't know if there's really anything I would change. I think something you could have done different, but not necessarily should have is it definitely would have also been interesting to see a version of the story where Cam and Minnie both came to the room to talk to the narrator about it while Vince is just like sleeping it off still or something. But again, that's not something you necessarily should have done. I just have fun thinking about how it changes or how much more dramatic it would become if Minnie was there and also being a voice who I think probably would have been torn between feeling even guiltier than Cam, but also feeling even more not knowing what to do and probably crying and yelling a little more, almost being willing to argue or fight back against the narrator's claims and complaints just because she's even more invested and even more did a terrible, awful, bad thing than Cam. Well, not necessarily worse, but just like it's even more personal for her, and she's probably going through even more of an emotional roller coaster right now.
Yeah, you see, that's actually something I did juggle with after finishing the story. Was sort of looking about it, going, should I have included Minnie as well? Ultimately, the reason I didn't was more about the time crunch than anything.
Yeah, it would have been easy for it to be too long too.
Oh yeah, because I mean, we've had those discussions. It would have could have easily tripled the length of the story having another voice in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what it mostly came down to was just time crunch. Was I wanted to keep this a short conversation between two people, and by bringing Minnie in, who has that more volatile personal side element of involvement in it, it would have probably drags the story out longer, both in terms of how long it is to read and narrate, but also in terms of how long to write. And unlike most stories, where I've got sort of a week roughly, which is still not a hugely long time to write and edit a story, to a prompt and things like that, all things considered. But unlike most stories where I had a week, just because of our personal circumstances, this cycle, I had literally a day.
Yep. That that one's on me this time. Not relevant to the audience at all. I'm sure no one cares, but just I I work
I mean, it's not just on you. I've been busy as well.
true, but I specifically work early in the morning when the podcast is supposed to be. So we're doing it early this week.
It worked out all right, I think.
Yeah.
All right. On that note, then, now we can actually leave it there. So, if you're one of those few people who is listening to this over on Spotify or YouTube instead of on my site, you can also find these episodes on my site, radfordwrites.com. I also share sort of blogs, articles, that sort of thing over there. You can buy my books through the site, which I very much appreciate people doing. There is also more new content on the way. In fact, depending on the order things go on, some of that other content might actually show up for you first. But there is a second podcast series I'm slowly working on getting set up. There is a mini series coming out at some point. All kinds of things. And of course, you will see plenty more of John involved in all of this, and you can see him elsewhere streaming on Twitch as Sephir, Sephear, and uploading those VODs to YouTube.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't bang your friend's spouse, and goodbye.
Yeah. Don't.